Thank you, Mr. Kimball. Good evening to everyone. I'd like to call this Town Council public hearing, 6:30 PM Tuesday, June 15, 2021 to order. Public hearing subject matter this evening is consideration of submissions to the 2021 Neighborhood Assistance Act program. With that, roll call, Ms. Milton.
Mr. Morris.
Here.
Mr. Slocum. Here. Mr. Irwin. Present. Mr. James. Here. Ms. Nichols. Mrs. Bonham. Here. Mr. Talbot. Mr. Dover.
Here.
Mr. Wolf.
Here.
Thank you, Ms. Milton. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. Okay, I will explain the hearing procedure and agenda, reading of the legal notice. We'll have a brief presentation of the hearing subject matter. If there are any members of the public here who have any questions or comments regarding the subject matter, that will certainly be allowed. With that, Ms. Milton, yeah, I have one, so sorry about that. Thank you very much, Ms. Milton. With that, we'll have a short presentation of the hearing subject matter from our town manager, Sean Kimball.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will be very brief. The Connecticut Neighborhood Assistance Act Tax Credit Program is designed to encourage contributions from corporations to help fund tax-exempt and municipal organizations that serve the public in the areas of energy conservation, employment and training, childcare, neighborhood assistance, and substance abuse, to name a few. Tax-exempt and municipal organizations can qualify for this program by filing state-provided application with their nearest municipality. The municipality's role is primarily administrative, as dictated by state statute. And this year, the town has received 2 submissions, one from Cheshire Academy for an environmental sustainability project, and one from the Hometown Foundation in support of their Police Canine Awareness Program. And both proposals meet the Neighborhood Assistance Act requirements. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kimball. I don't see any members of the audience here to ask any questions or comments, but are there any questions or comments? There is unfortunately no one present. So with that, I will close this public hearing. Thank you. And with that, we will move on to our town council special meeting immediately following the public hearing, also on Tuesday, June 15, 2021. And the first item on our agenda is discussion regarding the school modernization project recommendations and process. First and foremost, I'd like to make a brief introduction of the individuals who are here. We have both Chuck Warrington and John Koplis from Colliers International. Welcome to both of you. As the community knows, both of these individuals have been walking this path with our school modernization committee from its inception. And they will continue along throughout the process, not only with the Board of Ed and also the Town Council. So thank you both for being here. Obviously, our Town Manager, Sean Kimball, and our Director of Finance, Jim Jascott, are here as well, both individuals critically important to this process. From my perspective, now that the operating budget process is completed and we embark on the capital budget, it's very appropriate that we begin and evaluate the school modernization proposal. They presented to us in April to both the Town Council and the Board of Ed and presented their final recommendations. I think you've all seen the presentation. I think you were all present when we got it. You all have a copy of the report. Hopefully we've gone through it to the extent that we can. I know we've got a fair amount of work to do, and we're going to have a road ahead as well. But, the sooner we get to the nuts and bolts, the better. As we all know, the SMC is recommending a multi-phase modernization plan to occur over many, many years. Each phase would necessitate its own referendum. And as we embark on each phase of it, we would evaluate it and make sure that it works. If we all thought it was appropriate, we would advance it for the public support through referendum. That proposal, as you all probably know, has the recommendation for 2 new elementary schools, one at the north end of town, potentially replacing the Chapman School, and then one at the south end of town, potentially replacing the Norton School. It also includes existing Darcy and Chapman School buildings will be taken offline. And obviously, the existing Norton School would be replaced with a new school, hopefully on site, depending on whether the fit process would work. And obviously, there would be some redistricting as needed for that process. And that's just the first phase of this. We've got a lot of work to do. And in my opinion, I think our council should be focusing on the recommended proposal that was given to us, the SMC, and all of their staff members of the town and all of their consultants have worked very, very hard over the past year and a half or so. I know we were stymied a bit with COVID-19 and a variety of things, but nonetheless, they worked tirelessly to get to this point. And it's my opinion and recommendation to this group that we focus on their primary recommendation, which is the proposal that I just referenced very briefly. A lot of detail here regarding that proposal. I also believe that we really should be focused mostly on the economics. At least that's how I'm looking at it. As the fiscal authority for the town, I believe it's really incumbent on us to ensure that any plan that gets implemented is a fiscally responsible plan, one that our taxpayers can absorb appropriately. I know the Board of Ed is working at this time to evaluate the proposal as well that came forward from SMC. They have a variety of things that they need to do that are more relative to kind of their oversight, as we have some things to do on our side of the street that are more relative to our oversight. But rest assured, the collaboration will continue. In order for this process to be successful, in my opinion, it needs collaboration, not only with the Board of Ed, but also with the SMC. As we have more questions and we get through this process, I suspect we'll be reaching back to the SMC through their chair to the extent that we need them. Obviously, they're welcome to be at all of our meetings, and I'll make sure we have public comment at all of our meetings available. But, to the extent we need any input from them, I'll certainly reach out to Chuck, their chairman, and get information through him. And at some point, I'm sure we'll be collaborating much more with the Board of Ed once they get through their spec ed work and their curriculum evaluation, and making sure that whatever's been proposed works well for them from an educational perspective. That's really their purview. It's not a purview I have any interest in getting in. We're not those experts. They are. You all are, the consultants. So from my perspective, we really should be taking the plan that's been put before us and try to advance it as best we can in the context of our purview, which in my opinion is really a fiscal responsible way. So that's how I see this going forward. I think it makes it a little more concise. Doesn't mean we can't ask any question. Obviously, that's just my recommendation. I'm one of 9 members of this esteemed council, and you all can ask any questions you want, and we can certainly go down any paths you think are appropriate and reasonable. But I'd like to kind of try to keep it at least a little bit on task so that we can be as efficient and effective as possible. And again, I truly respect all the work that the SMC did. And I don't want anyone to think, well, they did their work and now it's just sitting in 2 bodies that really don't care what the result was. That's not the case. As I've read through this report multiple times now, it's abundantly clear to me that there was an enormous amount of time and energy and goodwill to get it to this point. And there's a lot of information here that will allow our job to be much easier going forward. And I greatly appreciate all of those volunteers who committed that enormous amount of time, and all the consultants and certainly staff as well that worked with them. It's critically important they got us to this point, and now it's just an extension of that same process. But this will continue to be a collaboration of our community. And I know the Board of Ed has been having some public sessions to get input from the community. We will have a public comment section in all of our meetings as well, like we do in any of our meetings. If any public wants to come and give us a comment, what I would ask is that you reserve your comments to the point where we have public comments so we can be efficient through our work, but nonetheless, you'll have every opportunity to weigh in on whatever we're speaking about. So kind of with that, I guess, what I would like to do is just maybe turn it over to Chuck and John, and certainly, Jim and Sean, if they have any brief comments. I know we talked about this, Chuck. We're not expecting a big detailed presentation unless someone feels we need it. I think we've had it, but there are probably a variety of things that maybe you want to kind of speak about at the moment. And then really, I'd like to kind of move it forward with some questions and answers. I would like to get a schedule going forward. Now that we are embarked on this process, I believe we should be meeting every 2 weeks to keep this train moving down the tracks. I think it's important for us, and I hope the public understands that, there's been almost 2 months or maybe a little more than 2 months since the SMC gave us their proposal. A lot has happened. A lot of stuff going on with the pandemic, as I'm sure everybody understands. And certainly we were mired in a very, very difficult operating budget process this year. So unfortunately, this is the first opportunity the council has had any real time to focus on this. But rest assured, we're going to take it from here as quickly as we possibly can and move it forward. So my recommendation to this group, and I'm open for suggestion, is that we try to meet every 2 weeks to advance the process. And obviously, if we have to modify, we will. But I want to make sure that we keep the train moving on the tracks of this process because I think it's very important. So with that, Chuck or John?
Good evening, Chuck Warrington. Nice to see all of you in person and not in front of a screen. It's been relieving to get back in person. I don't have a whole lot to say. I think all of you have been following the process. I'm not going to really get much into the weeds, rather get into questions. But the scenarios that were brought forth, for those in the public, one of the main factors that drove it was the enrollment projections, more so than I'll say the facilities conditions, if you will. All of them do need attention to a certain degree. And certainly during the process, there was, opinions on, what should be the first project in the plan. Some of them were the middle school. Certainly there were some recommendations from the public and comments for the high school. And we walked through those facilities and they're being maintained very well, but obviously they're older and at some point will need to be addressed. But as we looked at the data and when we started this process, we recommended data-driven results. And that being because as we live in communities and we work with many different communities, a lot of times there's opinions of what should occur, but they're not necessarily data-driven or with the research and the numbers and the background information to really support such a recommendation. It sounds like it's a good idea, but to be able to support the why, we know what the what is, and then we got to determine the how. But it's why is that recommendation? So we set out to establish good information. We had the enrollment projections from SLR, who's formerly Malone McBroom, who's definitely one of the lead demographers in the state. And I think having read some of the past reports and listening to some of the responses, I think there's a bit of a surprise maybe that the enrollments at least the elementary school level are increasing. And I kind of sense that there's an expectation to be flat or maybe decreasing. And what it indicated, essentially, in looking at the capacities of where you're at, is we need more square footage ultimately when it comes down to. And I think that might have been a little bit of surprise coming out of this one. But both of these scenarios were essentially geared in that manner with two different solutions to address the space need at the K-6 level. If you read in the report, the middle school, as is for the 7th and 8th grade configuration, is showing that it can accommodate the projection utilizing the space standard that the state utilizes. And that's a calculation that I'm sure you've all seen. And is in the report that the state utilizes to basically give them a guide of, are these buildings, one, how much are they going to reimburse, first and foremost, but secondly, is the building big enough, or is it too big, or is it too small for the projected enrollment? And it's in that case, it's a guide, but they also looked at the capacity analysis, which essentially they look at number of homeroom classrooms, special education resources, and they develop a capacity as well. But taking all that information into account, these are the two scenarios that collectively we felt address the needs, hopefully and that's going to be determined in the most fiscally responsible way, but also in a manner that the state of Connecticut, who we met with, the director of Office of School Construction Grants and Review. And for those who don't know, that's the governing body over the grant applications and the grant commitments on behalf of the Department of Education. We met with that body, we shared the information, and they're certainly in support of this preferred option of 2 elementary schools. The size of them being roughly 600 to 700 students, kind of in the mid-range there. And that scenario basically right sizes most of your schools instead of being disparate. I think around 350 for Chapman in that range to up to 700-800 range for Highlands. So it kind of spreads it out a little bit more. But yeah, the enrollment was really the driver here for these options, and so that's how we kind of came about it. As far as some of how we establish budgets, we put in a sample of how we put together what we call total project budget. We didn't review that a whole lot in detail with the SMC, but we'd be more than happy to if there's any questions and go through that in detail, how we come about that. At Colliers, we've been very successful in establishing budgets that are, it's always a trick, obviously, is what's the right budget. And you just went through the process, not budgeting too much, but budgeting enough so you can successfully get through the project, but you're not putting such a burden on taxpayers for that. But so that's kind of where we're at now with the process. We obviously looked at a lot of other factors. We looked at prices of property. Should we have to go to a parcel that's not town owned? That's included in these costs as well. But again, they're total project budgets, construction, soft costs, which are fixtures, furniture, and equipment, fees and expenses, architects' fees, owner's rep fees, material testing, printing, copying, legal fees. Very importantly, bonding and finance costs. Those are not included in our costs at this time because each town is unique in how you finance. So we leave that up to you to kind of guide us and tell us what to incorporate into the budget. That's the only thing that's not included. And then owner's contingency. It's always important to carry a contingency for unforeseen conditions, betterments in the process. There will always be requests in every project we see that come up, building official requests during construction. So we include that as well. So that it's other than the financing costs, they are comprehensive budgets in our opinion. So at this point, obviously, we made our presentation in early April, and you've had the report. We understand you've been preoccupied with other items, and we're talking with Chairman Orris. We're kind of assuming tonight's kind of a kickoff of your efforts, and certainly happy to answer any questions. And certainly as we go, we recommended having a process to submit written questions either through the town manager, through his office to us or directly to us, however you want to do that. And then we can prepare those. The information you see is high level. We have a ton of spreadsheets and data behind us, so we can certainly, I think, easily dig that information out for you. And if we haven't calculated it, we can do so. And I think relatively short order, at least we hope. So that's kind of where we're at, and I guess I'll kick it off from there.
Yep, thank you, Mr. Slocum. If you don't mind, just 1 sec. I just want a couple of quick things. Chuck, thank you on that. And I do think as we go forward, making sure we all send our questions in ahead of time is going to be most productive and efficient. This way it gives staff and our consultants an opportunity to properly vet whatever the questions are. I just would be remiss if I didn't mention the fact that, as the public knows, SMC was made up of a very diverse group of people from the community, members of the Board of Ed, members of the Town Council, and members of the public. 3 members of this council sat on that committee, Ms. Nichols, Mr. Walsh, and Mr. Jinks. I want to personally thank all 3 of them for their time and effort. But obviously, they're more knowledgeable in this process than all of us. So before we get to questions and answers, and I apologize, Mr. Slocum, but I wanted to give each of them, I know Ms. Nichols is running a little late, she'll be here shortly, but Mr. Walsh or Mr. Jinks, I'd certainly like to give you an opportunity if you'd like to say anything relative to your experience on the SMC and anything else you'd like to say regarding, what we're talking about here. So, Mr. Jinks? Mr. Walsh?
All right, I'll go first. Well, being on the SMC for a year and a half, there was a lot of discussion about just about everything we could think of the schools. Between touring all the schools and seeing the conditions of them, I think we all realized something needs to be done. And I appreciate when we brought Colliers in with Chuck and John, they brought a whole different aspect of how we should be looking at things. And once you started meeting with the state almost dictated what we can and can't do. And I mean, I'm going to ask Chuck later if he can go through that, where the state process would eliminate certain phases and why they feel this is the most important one, because everybody has their own idea of what would work best for this town. And like our chairman said, the bottom line is we have to be fiscally prudent on what we decide to do, but we also need to improve on our schools. The members of the SMC it was a wide span of people with different backgrounds, and I think it really helped form this proposal that was presented. And none of us took it lightly. We worked really hard to make sure that what we were giving to the town council was something that was totally vetted, that we really took the time to make sure it was the right proposal and the right scenarios for our town. And as we go through this process with the town council, I think, and I'm hoping that we will come up with something that will be approved by the town, and we could start, moving forward to school modernization in this town, which is well past the time of when we should have done it. And I think it's time that we get off our butts and start doing something that we can really be proud of in this town. Our schools interior, the people are the best, in my opinion, in the state. The building itself need work, and once we fix the buildings, I don't think there will be any school system in this state that will compete with us. So that's all I have to say for now.
Thank you very much, Mr. Walsh. Mr. Jenks, anything?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to echo, Rob, your initial comments as far as thanks to the members of the SMC, council members, Board of Ed members, and also certainly the public. It certainly was a long process. Chuck and John were there and remember it fondly, I'm sure. But obviously the schools are really important to the community, and as Don said, it's definitely time for us to do something with the schools. Obviously we have to figure out what is best from a fiscal standpoint, also from the facility standpoint. I will say that I did not support the recommended plan for a few reasons, but one being that the public comments that I've gotten, or the feedback I've gotten from the public, had largely to do with people were generally supportive of a middle school rather than larger elementary schools. So that kind of drove a lot of my thought process on kind of what the direction we should go. And I hope that I'll have an opportunity to present a sort of an alternative scenario at some point that does include a middle school, but is actually less costly than the scenario, the middle school scenario that we have in our proposal here. So at some point, I'd like to kind of go through that with everyone. But anyway, I just wanted to say thank you again to the SMC. It was a lot of work, and I certainly, all the effort that went into this report is apparent, and a lot of very good information here. And I urge everyone in the community to read it and get back, to educate yourself on the issues at hand here. But as I said, the schools are very important, and it certainly is time for us to do something about them. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Jenks. Mr. Slocum.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and also thank you to those members of this body that served on that year and a half findings report, because having observed some of the meetings at home on Zoom or by that time YouTube, and certainly reading the report, it's a very fulsome report, seems to be substantiated, and I think coming to some surprising results for me. I mean, I think we've been sort of, I don't want to say led to believe, because that's unfair, but it was a decent way to address some problems, to address the construction of a middle school. We learned that over time. It seemed to be a means to an end that would allow, kids to stay in their home schools. But it seems clear to me, the fulsomeness of the report demonstrates that, there's data backing that that's not necessarily the best approach. And financially, it certainly doesn't seem to be the best approach. And yet I know this is a building block for many things. Ultimately, maybe 20 years, we are looking at changes in the high school or whatever. So I'm not here to worry about or demonstrate that we've decided how the plan should go over a 15-year period. I don't think that needs to be our goal. Our goal needs to be that we get out of this report a plan that works best for the community. It does seem to me that the committee in general, the SMC that is, came to the conclusion by a fair majority that the two elementary schools would be a better approach to go. And I think with that, I would certainly be in support of going that way. I've read the report. It seems to indicate that that's the way to go. Even though there's surprises in the report, clearly the North End is going to have a real problem in their elementary schools. There's just no question. I mean, we were talking about closing Chapman School. For who knows what reason. This goes back over time. You guys weren't here. But the bottom line is we certainly can't exist without a Chapman School replacement. It's pretty obvious. I guess maybe it's because of the available space and development that's taking place up there. But I guess that I'll conclude that sort of statement with this general question, because I think this is important for the community. I think it's important for the council, is to really get a better sense of what we are going to be doing in a time frame that's looking forward maybe the next 4 years, because we know we don't start building a school with a referendum that takes place more likely next year, certainly than this year. So I think we've done the analysis. This council has to actually dig into what that analysis truly represents with costs and everything else, as does, as Rob said, the Board of Education, to really work this out. But the bottom line is we need to present to the public a time frame. When are we really starting to spend our money? When is design finished? Expectations are important. Someone making a decision on where their first grader is going to be is very different than someone who has someone who's approaching middle school age in fifth grade. They wonder when it's going to be done. When are we going to be building? And I think if we can get out of that, this report, that we're actually looking at not year one of a capital budget, but year two of a capital budget, or whatever it may be. We need to set that expectation straight immediately. I don't think as we conclude our capital budget process soon, that we're necessarily ready for November with the contemplation of a number. I think you guys know that. And I think we need to put that forth. And that's something that has to come out fast and early, just because people's expectations are probably, well, we finished with this darn report and council's got to decide how much we're going to spend and Board of Ed's got to be on board. I think that is all true, but expectations have to be clearly understood by the public. They have to know that we put in all this effort and time. Oh, by the way, it's not going to be here tomorrow, but it's not going to be here 5 years from now. That's sort of my way of saying that we got to make that clear in your process questions that we get from you. And as we unfold with numbers, you'll be able to guide us with that pretty quickly. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Slocum, and welcome to Ms. Nichols. I know you've got a very busy schedule. You got a lot going on these days. Not only was she directly involved in SMC, but she's been running personnel, and there's a lot of stuff in personnel these days. So welcome, Ms. Nichols. And I'm sorry that we got started a few minutes before you got here, but I wanted to thank all of the town council members who were a part of the SMC, and certainly let each of you have an opportunity to just give us a quick statement on your behalf. We thank you for the hours you put in, and turn it over to you if you have any comment.
Yeah,
Thank you.
thank you. I apologize for being late. We have a graduating senior tomorrow night, so we've been at things this morning at 7:00 in the morning, and there's things this evening and all of that goes with it. Yeah, I was pleased to be on that committee and to share that job with Jim and Don. I think that we have presented a very well thought out process here. I think we all have to realize that we have an issue to face, which is that this needs to be done in some manner. I think we should be very careful to be listening to the voices of the constituents who will be most affected by this. I have personally attended at least 2 of the meetings that the Board of Ed presented to parents in the last week, Monday and Wednesday, or Tuesday and Thursday, or whatever days they were. And I was interested to hear some of the comments and the logic that the parents are using. I think as a council, we need to be very cognizant of the costs of this, but I think we also should listen to the fact that people who are expecting a good product are expecting that it's going to cost some money. They are not expecting it to be done for nothing. It is incumbent upon us to make sure that that money is well spent and done in a reasonable manner. And I didn't hear what Don and Jim said, but I listened in there to Mr. Slocum, and I think you're right. We need to set an expectation, because as we go to those meetings, there are some people that don't understand the process. However, Colliers has been very upfront with us all the way through this process about the time frame and when it will be. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, we're at the point where we've decided, or pretty much come to the conclusion, that it probably will not be to referendum this November. Is that a correct assumption? We just cannot get the facts and figures together in time. So I think it's going to become a recommendation that it goes to referendum in the spring, March or April or something, because it is important that we deal with the financial part of it. We are never, ever, ever going to make 100% of the people in Cheshire pleased with whatever decision we make. But as council people, we know that in every decision we make, we can never make everybody 100% happy. Our goal here is to provide the best product for the town, to make at the best affordable price, and carefully, as we have done for many years on this council, carefully budgeting with the help of Jim and Sean and Michael and whoever in the past, to make sure that we can adequately finance the projects that we decide to do in a reasonable manner. And keep in mind that in addition to the schools, there are other things that the town needs to maintain. Any of the other infrastructure in the town. So I'm pleased with the recommendation that is here. We've listened to the state, we've listened to the teachers, we've listened to the students, we've been to see schools out of the town, in the town. We've seen schools that have been in the process of being built, in the process of being remodeled. We are confident that, we toured the South Windsor schools when the schools were being built while the students were there, and saw the results of how that can be done. So we're confident that that can be done in a reasonable way. So I really think it's up to us on the council to support a project and just be careful about the finances. And that's what we're looking to you, Jim and Sean, and to see how we can spend the money, where we're going to get the money. So thank you. That's all.
Thank you, Ms. Nichols, and thank you for your work on the committee. Other questions or comments from members of the council? Mr. Bowery.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wish to thank the council members and the Board of Ed members who did double duty, serving on this as well as public members. I think it was a very thorough report. I think having Colliers come in really focused things on what mattered and what was important, and getting information from the state drove a lot of what's going on here and what came on in the recommendation. I think with regard to costs, it is expensive. It will be the most expensive project this town has ever done, but it often is in other communities as well. It's not unique to us. It is one of the most important things that we do, is provide a good education. And I think by providing a good education, it affects everybody in town, not just the 35 or 40% of the homes that have kids that are of school age. It affects everybody because of property values. So the seniors who are getting ready to sell, they're not going to sell their 4-bedroom house to another group of seniors. They're going to sell the 4-bedroom house to somebody with kids. So it's important to us as a council to keep the focus that this is an asset that we really need to protect and that we really need to enhance. And towards that end, it is going to be expensive, but I think the council has had the foresight over the last few years to put money away in our debt reserve fund. Last year, $600,000. This year, $1 million. We got some good bond prices when we went out earlier this year, and have some extra money in there from as well. So I think we've got an opportunity, and there's also some ARP funds that may or may not be able to help out with this. But there are some ways to mitigate some of this. But I think equally important, there's the cost of the debt service, but the other side is the operating expenses. And if this plan does take offline 2 buildings, then you've got the possibility of saving some overhead expenses, some operating expenses that can cover some of the debt service costs as well. So I think this is a well thought out plan. I do have quite a few questions. I am interested in hearing what Mr. Jinks had to say, because he's got some other take on some of this, which is important to hear. But I'll send the questions forward, and at our other meetings, we'll get into more details and stuff. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Barber. Ms. Pavano?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was on the Board of Education when the first project of the middle school went to referendum. And one of the reasons why that project failed is because of the lack of information. So sitting here on this council, information is probably up on top of the list as well as how much this is going to cost and what Cheshire can afford. My other thought is, we've been hearing a lot on TV lately about the cost of building materials. So I'm a little concerned that some of the projected costs here are not going to come in where you're projecting them at this point. So that is one of the questions I would like to have discussed at another meeting, because I have friends that are in building and stuff, and they said that some projects are coming in, $70,000, $80,000 higher than what they predicted. And we're not dealing with 70 or 80,000, we're dealing with millions. So that is something I would like to see the council and us discuss with you. And I appreciate all the effort that went into this, because I was sitting on that committee, and I thank you very much for all your work and the committee.
Thank you, Ms. Pavano. Other members of the council? No?
Oh,
Mr. Velber, no?
Yep, thank you. I just wanted to echo the comments. I mean, we've already heard eight comments, so everyone echoing what it is. But I think this is a project that the SMC did a great job getting to where it is, and we appreciate your work and your guidance getting them there. It really creates a good blueprint for us to move forward on this. And I think collectively, I think we're all going to be really energized and invigorated to really look to see how we can do that for the best of the community. So I thank also all the members of the SMC for their work, and the members of the council and the Board of Ed as well. But now we have this great plan, and we're going to see how we can effectuate this. So thank you very much for your efforts, and we look forward to going forward as a council. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Velber. And I think that leaves no one left who has any comments. What I will say is I agree with Ms. Pavano. It is absolutely, in my opinion, our job to ensure the public has rock solid information to base their decision on. And in my opinion, that's why, it's the reason why I didn't vote to send the last proposal to referendum, because I felt there were a lot of holes in the proposal. And we have to make sure that what we send to the public is extremely well vetted, that the public can make an educated decision. It is their future that we're putting on the ballot. And we need to make sure that we cover every base. I think we've got a good start here. I do think, as Mr. Bowery mentioned, though, there are a variety of places that we need to go, which I'm going to have a lot more questions that I'll certainly get in writing. But one of the things that we talk about is other savings, whether it be capital improvement savings that could be incurred because we're modernizing schools and we're foregoing probably, continued improvements to older schools. There should be operating savings. And I know that the SMC dove into this to some degree. In the report that I'm reading, I don't see a lot of information relative to that. I think we need that information. I think it's incumbent on us to give that information to the public so that when we give them something to vote on, they understand what the net impacts are going to be to the mill rate and therefore their taxes, and whether they can afford to vote for that or not. I don't think there's any individual on this council or the Board of Ed or SMC or probably most people in this community that doesn't agree we need to begin school modernization. But I can tell you with my vote as one of 9, I will always base my vote in fiscal prudence. That's why we've done such a good job managing this community. We've made targeted investments where we've needed to. We have not spent taxpayer money frivolously. We've managed it as if it was our own money. I will look at this scenario exactly the same way as if I'm spending my own dollars. I want a cost benefit analysis. I want to make sure that we can afford it. There is no question school modernization needs to happen. What I don't want to do is drive all of our seniors or those that are on fixed income out of our community. So, we as a council, as a fiscal authority, need to think more of just the school system. It's really about every individual in our community. And oh, by the way, our businesses who are here probably paying the largest taxes of all. I want to see what these impacts are going to be to our largest taxpayers. So when we talk about, in phase 1 here, it looks like it could potentially be approaching a 2 mil increase based on what's proposed. Well, what is that real impact to our largest taxpayers? We talk about, it's $226 to an average taxpayer, but that's really not the average cost to the average taxpayer. It's really $390 per year over the course of the 24 years based on what I'm reading. And that's an average taxpayer of a house and 2 cars paying $7,742. That's not everyone in this community. So I guess my point in saying all this is that we've got to take this to the next level. We've had a great handoff. We appreciate everything SMC has done. We're going to make sure that whatever we bring forward meets the needs of the school system from a curriculum perspective and allows them to grow into it well into the future. But for me, as I said earlier, my biggest issue is fiscal prudence test. Can we afford it? I'm confident we can come up with a scenario that we can. We just need to have good information and be able to pass that on. So for me, Jim and Sean and our consultants, most of my questions are not going to be focused on we should go do another plan. I'm going to respect what the committee's already done. And they overwhelmingly supported a proposal, which is in front of us. I'm going to vet that proposal in a fiscally responsible manner and see if we can roll it out that makes sense. If we get to a point where we can't and we need to look at other options, I'm more than willing to entertain for Mr. Jinks other options or anyone else. But for me right now, I'm going to focus on what was presented to us. And that's the main proposal that came out of SMC. That's what we asked them to do. And that's what I believe we need to respect their wishes at this point and go forward. Doesn't mean we can't change gears, but we all have a piece of this wheel. And I'm not looking to reinvent it at the town council level. That's why I'm saying it's a great jump off point. We got a lot of good information to take to the next step. So Jim, I don't know, how you want to handle this going forward. I have a plethora of very detailed financial questions, as you probably expect. I'm happy to put them in writing so that we can maybe address this at another time. I'm not sure we need to get into it tonight, so I'll be happy to do that. And what I'm going to be looking for is really not only what these projects do in terms of an increase in the mill rate, but what does it look like over a timeline into the future rolled into our overall budget? Right. Other capital improvements that we may or may not be bringing online. We've got Bartland Park, for instance, in this year's capital budget. That's another costly project. So, we've got to be able to bring school modernization in and still target, invest into other areas of the community, continue to provide services that the community expects beyond just the school system. So we need to see what all those other impacts are. Do we have debt service going down or going up? And how is that going to look into the future? Those sensitivity analysis, we're going to be looking for you to help us with, Jim. And I know it's not easy, but I think we need it.
No, I kind of expecting that. So anything you can get me ahead of time, in the way of questions, just help me get it organized.
Okay. I mean, I've got, as you can see, I've flagged all kinds of stuff in here, which I'm going to reach out to you. And again, it's not to be an obstructionist at all. It's just this whole group, I know, wants to give good information to the public when we finally get to that point. And that's really all we're doing is we're vetting for them. And so, we need to take that job very seriously. The other thing is, I know that Mr. Massiana from the schools had put together some information relative to operating and capital savings, depending on what schools were closed. I would certainly like to see that added into the mix here as well. I think that's going to be relevant. I know Mr. Bauer referenced it. And the only other thing is, for me, the only last comment I would make for tonight is phase one, in my opinion, we should be trying to check off as many critically important ADA issues as we can. We have a number of ADA issues in some of our schools that need to be addressed. Clearly, Chapman is one of them. Phase one addresses that. We probably have some issues at Norton. Phase one addresses that. But I personally believe that we ought to be looking at an option for Humiston as well a little earlier in the process. And I know that was discussed but not put in, but I think it's something that your committee, the SMC, had talked about at length. And, maybe we want to talk about in one of these elementary schools, whether we add some additional space for Humiston for the classrooms and potentially for the Board of Ed administrative space. There is reimbursement money available for that, not to the same amount, correct, Chuck? But I think, in my opinion, that's another area of questions that I'm going to be asking is, how can we speed up the process of Chapman? I personally don't think we should be renovating Chapman. I think we're going to spend good money after bad. And I would rather see us, move that facility to a brand new facility somewhere else. That's me personally. So just kind of more of a global perspective of what I'm looking at, but I'm really going to focus mostly on the economics from my perspective. Anything else from members? Mr. Slocum?
A question coming out of the report. When you went through your line by line, year by year, I should say, analysis on mill rate adjustment due to debt service, that doesn't contemplate any other changes in our budget process. That's strictly building construction operating costs. So we're sort of already looking at information that obviously has to be amended. That's just the importance of what Rob just said to you, Jim, because that's really, we know we have an operating budget that we, that we see historically grow a certain percentage every year. And now we're seeing debt service explode in a relative sense. Maybe that's a scary word, but for us, it's an explosion. So that I guess has to be tethered together in a knot we can really feel comfortable.
Yep, and that's certainly doable.
I figured because we're normally seeing your debt service lines, and yet we got to now add this to that line. So your line has to really reflect that so that we know what the true mill rate increase is going forward with these projects. And I completely agree with Rob. This project has to include the dismantling of certain operations in town, whether it's the administration or the special high school education that takes place in that building. And that's not a question for Jim, but I think that's critical to our efforts here because we either build it into the high school, we build it into a new school plan, but it's going to be important for me, and I believe the council, and also in the sales product to the residents of the town, the taxpayers of town. So, thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Slocum. Other members of the council? Chuck or John, anything you'd like to add based on what you heard?
Yeah, maybe just, I know there's some, questions on the timeline, and maybe I can shed a little bit of light. It's still kind of early. Yeah, so to get to a November referendum, just to confirm that, we think we're kind of beyond that. There's only 2 months. That's just not enough time to prepare documentation. I think you'd have to finalize it by, I think, towards the end of August to have it in November. I don't think that's reasonable from our experience, and I'm sure yours. I know there's been mention maybe potentially in the spring. That is key is if it's held in the spring based upon similar size projects we have, these elementary schools of similar size, it's about a 3-year period from when you start, you pass referendum, you do an architect selection, you go through a design process, you bid it out, and then you build the building. And that's a very high level, simple schedule, but that's about a 3-year. So if you went on the spring, we would anticipate, short of, permitting or other issues that we're not aware of yet, to potentially be able to occupy those schools in the fall of 2025. Should it occur in the fall of 2022, that would probably push that occupancy out probably a year. for that. So it'd be a fall of 2026. And that's probably really the biggest delta. And again, we're going to lay out a whole macro schedule. You've seen some of our schedules in the timeline for these that have reasonable timelines. We don't compress them. Like, for example, the bidding process, it's 3 months. Everybody thinks it takes a month. It's 3 by the time you're done. But we'll lay those different scenarios out so you can evaluate those and go, should we do it in April? Should we do in November? And then also, how's that, and we talked about it with SMC, how does that impact the amount of cost you're gonna have to carry for soft costs until you can submit a grant reimbursement request to the state? Because if we we certainly encourage submitting a grant application next June. I think we can easily achieve that, prepare educational specifications. We already have enrollment projections and the other documentation. We've done it in 2 or 3 months in a shorter time frame when it's a much simpler process or a more focused or one school, if you will. But certainly for next June, which in the timeline of the state, it's basically a year before they vote on a priority. They put together a priority list and vote on the actual bonding for that package. So they're just voting on, I think, just now for candidates that submitted last year. So if you start in April, your first real bill doesn't really start coming in until probably July by the time you get going and the process gets going. So you're looking about a year's worth. And some districts, it's okay. Some, it's more of a stress. But it's good to know what that carrying is. If you go in November, your first bills come in probably January, February, and then you're getting reimbursed in August. So it's maybe 6 months, 5 months until you're to carry, which is obviously less. But then when you're pushing out that construction, there's the offset with your escalation and those factors. So we can play with both of those pretty easily and just show you graphically what those timelines would be.
Thank you, Chuck. Quick question that's not that detailed. I know you touched on this earlier, that in the proposed plan, the recommended plan of the 2 new elementary schools, that it would create better balance, I guess, amongst all of the elementary schools relative to enrollment. It's my understanding that Highland is the largest of the group, 750 kids, I guess, in that school, compared to 300 or 400 in the other. So if in fact this plan goes forward and gets built, it creates a better balancing scenario. Is that correct, relative to the new schools where they would all be generally in the same number of students? And I think from a curriculum presentation perspective, that's more ideal, because I think from what I read about it is because of Highland School, they kind of have to teach a little differently than maybe the other elementary schools. Is that accurate?
Yeah, in the proposal, in both options, the proposal is to take Darcy offline, which is your early childhood education program and some kindergarten classes from Doolittle. Some of those are actually going back to Doolittle, I think, this fall. Superintendent Solon mentioned, but that program would go to Highland. The entire program would be there because of those efficiencies that you split them up in different schools, and that operating cost isn't as efficient. But yeah, it'll still be the largest one at Highland, I think, because of that. But they'll range our numbers, and it's in the report, from 612 to 669. So they're consistent in that low to mid 600 range for student enrollment. The state of Connecticut was very much on board. For though I think Sylvia, you had attended, they're on board with that. Just the size of school, how to operate the school, and also just, we have little people walking around a large school, just getting to the cafeteria. That takes time in the day, and it's a stress on those programs. So those schools are about as big as you probably, we're close to 100,000 square feet. We don't see too many that much bigger, at least in Connecticut anyways.
Redistricting.
What's that?
Redistricting come into play.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, once the first phase is done for redistricting, John was mentioning, was it 15 or 18%? 18% of the children would be affected, which, and it happened once. After the first phase, there'd be one big redistricting. So it's a one-shot deal. It's not multiple redistricting, which is obviously very disruptive. And we don't want that for the children to be going back and forth. So.
Thank you. Mr. Slocum?
Yeah, this is just a question on your experience. presumptive with the plan is that you're building two schools, I assume somewhat simultaneously. How disruptive in a community, an educating community, is your experience with something like that? Are there examples of that type of activity happening, across small towns? Well, we're a medium-sized town. What do you anticipate other than, obviously there's a lot of work going on at Cheshire.
Yeah.
How's that going to have, what's the impact there?
Impact to the education?
Well, just the process, it's going to impact that community, especially if you're doing on-site in Norton, and off-site at the other one, I guess, is non-invasive. But it seems like a big management project, and where our public building bodies come into this, or do they not play as big a role? These are just questions I would have.
Yeah, no.
Over time.
Yeah, some of the committee members actually visited. Ms. Nichols mentioned South Windsor. That's the exact example that we're talking about in the phase we just finished last year. We opened those last September. 2 elementary schools designed and constructed at the same time. Size zone's not such a factor. I mean, whether you're building 65,000 square feet or 100,000 square feet, it's a difference of a month or two. So that's not really a factor. What's really important in the process is hiring your right collective project team. In addition to your building committee, you have to have a building committee that leads it. But in my experience, hiring that right team, we would recommend one architect for both, because there's efficiencies in that, writing your specifications, et cetera. One contractor, depending on the delivery, their state's going back and forth on that. One contractor or construction manager, and you vet that process out. As far as disruption, I think it's all about messaging, reaching out to your neighbors, like especially Norton. Norton's going to be, if we, the next step we're recommending is a test fit, and we're actually vetting proposals right now as we speak. We received 2 today. We're waiting for a 3rd one tomorrow to test fit Norton for a 100,000 square foot school. And can it truly fit there with today's programmatic needs? The second challenge, and one of the questions in the meetings last week with Board of Ed was, how are we going to achieve that, and how disruptive is it? How can we manage that with the existing school operations? So that's certainly a question to be handled with some of the today's Connecticut's firms. They're extremely good. They're very, very talented. They're all, they're all construction professionals, tradesmen as well, and the architects. So disruption is certainly there, but it can be mitigated with the proper communication. Like a lot of the firms, the CM firms, they'll go out in the community. They'll actually walk the community and pass out a flyer, business cards. We'll do public information sessions, and we'll walk them through the phasing plans and go, okay, this phase you can expect X. We're going to put up fencing. You're going to start seeing the trees, unfortunately, come down, but you're going to start seeing steel go up. And then in that summer of 25 or 26 at Norton, we're going to flip. We're going to vacate the building, demolish it, redo the parking lots. So as far as disruption, it's probably about 18 months to do those projects of that size. And it's kind of relative too, right? Some folks encourage it. They like to see it, and they tolerate it for the 18 months. Some aren't so tolerant. So it's a little bit of a subjective question, on that, but we certainly want to mitigate the noise. We're going to follow all the noise ordinances. We're going to be certainly mindful of, parent and bus drop-off times in the morning and the afternoon. And also the local neighbors who don't have kids the trucks are going to be going by. We got to be cognizant of that too. And because when you hear tractor, triaxles driving by and air brakes going off in the diesel engine, humming, it's a bit loud. So I'm not giving you a very precise answer. I do apologize, but we had a successful process there. I think the residents were really happy to see it. I know the Philip R. Smith, I don't know if you went and saw that one, Sylvia, but a friend of mine lived right by and was very successful in selling his house recently with a brand new school nearby. So, talking about some of the factors, I think he had 9 offers in the first day, having a brand new school nearby. So it's all about messaging and reaching out to your community and engaging them and listening to them and what their needs, just like we're doing now, but for construction. So I apologize for the long-winded answer.
Thank you, Ms. Slocum. Excuse me, Ms. Nichols, and then Mr. Borwe.
Yeah, I just want to respond to that, Chuck, and to you, Tim. We toured 3 different places where schools were built and while students were in the schools. One was Meriden, one was North Haven, one was South Windsor. All of the administrators in those places sung the praises of the construction people, and they were very, very careful to say that things were carefully designed to be done at times when the serious, noisiest projects were done when they were on vacation or school breaks or whatever, as much as they could. They separated the construction from where the students were by actual physical walls so that you couldn't go through a curtain and get into the construction site. And in North Haven and South Windsor in particular, the schools got on board with designing some of the activities in the curriculum of the students to incorporate some of the construction activities. So that made it easier. In South Windsor in particular, the community got on board, and that's why we have to make that work here in town, where the parents got on board. And every time a school was to be built, when there was a groundbreaking, the principals and the students from each of the other elementary schools went to that new school to watch it and to participate in the groundbreaking. And hooray, 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 there's going to be a new school at Chapman. And then all the Chapman kids came to Norton and said, hooray, 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 Norton's going to be ready. And by doing that, everybody felt like they had a voice in what was going on. So I was totally impressed by that. North Haven was a complete remodel of the middle school. And it looked like a brand new school, and the principal had no significant issues with the problem. So just to make what he's saying is right. We've witnessed it for ourselves. So same contractors. Yeah, right.
Thank you, Ms. Nichols. Mr. Borwe.
Thank you. Chuck, just to go back, were you referring to Norton having a new building built on site or having it as a retrofit to expand it to add a few more students?
Yeah, no, the current plan is for a new elementary school.
Okay.
In the back half of that lot, if you've seen the lot, it's kind of like a flag lot, and it's got a large parcel in the back that's wooded. Constructing back there, we call it occupy construction, where there'd be a fence right between the two. As Sylvia said, they're completely blocked off. Nobody can get, they will cut little holes for the kids so they can see the construction, which is pretty neat. And then that summer, right before occupancy, we're actually starting in January to pack stuff up, starting to purge, get things packed up. So after that last day of school, we bring a team of movers in and pull them out, put them in their new location, abate, demolish, and establish the site for whatever the design may be.
Well, and the reason I'm asking that is because there is some discussion among some people, including at least one Board of Ed member, that they would like to explore whether it's possible to add to Norton as opposed to having to make a new one. And I think we'd have to look at that and put that to bed as quickly as possible, whichever was more economical or more practical. But having heard that, I wasn't sure what you were referring to.
Yeah, at least in this plan.
This plan is for new.
The budgets we put forth are for new. We can very easily modify it for addition renovation, they would call it. And certainly we can have a team test fit that and see what does that look like, for that. And I don't think that's a huge effort to study that. It's not like a very expensive effort, I don't think, to do that.
All right. And then just briefly, your comment before that one, before Mr. Slocum asked his question, you talked about the redistricting and that 15-18% would be, and I heard you folks talk about that before, but that presupposes that we do the two new elementary schools at the same time. So that's another case for doing them together, because then it would be less redistricting. It wouldn't make a lot of sense from a disruption point of view to do just one and say the other one will be in phase 2. So we do want to do them together.
I think so. It all depends how you draw. If you've seen the redistricting maps that SLR put together, and they're really good at that. It all depends how you draw those lines, and you can get creative. If the solution was, hey, 1 and 1, which I think everybody's kind of encouraging too, but if need be, we'd have to engage them and go, okay, how do we do this so we minimize, that northern half probably would be first. I would suspect, but the problem is Norton is probably still going to run out of room if you look at the charts, so, that we have the blue lines and then the orange graph. They're going to run out of room quickly. At the same time, they're all approaching that capacity issue. So I think that's more of a driver, probably more so than actual redistricting part.
Yeah, and especially if you're bringing Darcy Kindergarten into Doolittle, which hasn't had it yet, you would want to push those kids down into the new capacity that's available.
Yeah, you got to take some of the Doolittle. Some of them probably go north. Into assume new one up north, and redistrict in that Highline district there,
Right.
and then it's probably kind of a shift. So it's kind of an art in putting that together. But I think the capacity analysis, looking in I want to say the 26, 27 years, all of them are getting to that push point.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Barr. Ms. Slocum, do you have another question? No. I thought you did. Mr. Walsh.
Thank you. I have just a quick question as well. Since you mentioned, I mean, if with Norton being pushed above capacity, if we did that way, what happens? And I don't know if this is something you could answer or a superintendent would answer. If we do nothing and the enrollment studies are correct, because you hear a lot of people say, well, 15 years ago we had more kids in the schools, but I think, from what being on the SMC, we learned there's a whole different way of teaching now than there was 15 years ago. And I think the people have to understand that, when they were in school, 15, 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago, there were a lot more kids in the classrooms and everything else. But there's a whole different way of teaching these days where space is needed, and the state will require that as well, if I'm correct on that. But if we did nothing, then we could be into trouble because we're going to have to find space for these students.
Yeah, that's correct, Mr. Walsh. And Dr. Solon can, speak to the educational part, but obviously, if nothing's done, you're probably looking at portables, realistically speaking. That's what every district falls back on. That's throwing really money down the tubes because it's not brick and mortar. In the state of Connecticut will tell you they want to see brick and mortar. They don't support portables. But also, as you said, the programming, everything, a lot of stuff has changed in the last 10, 15 years, and it's, I think, still evolving, where a lot of programs are in district now. Dr. Solon talks about, the pre-K programs and the kindergarten programs, and keeping those children in district is those are space requirements there. But if that does come to fruition, I think you're probably looking at a very stressed Board of Education looking to purchase portables, and installing those. They kind of vary, but we did some in Fairfield, Connecticut, and just to install and rent them for like a year and a half was like $150,000 per classroom, and it's just not efficient. The kids have to go, outside, or you build a walkway and heat it, and it's you can do it. Just
Not secure either.
Yeah, and brick and mortar is obviously a better solution long term. And so,
Okay, one other thing. I know, some people heard tonight for the first time that we probably will not reach a referendum this November, but I don't want people to get down on that, because I've always said, we need to get this right. We can't rush into something if we don't have all the facts. Like our chair said, we need to make sure that the public has every bit of information they need to make sure that they can properly vote on this, because it's going to fiscally impact everybody, every taxpayer in this town. And it's important that we have all that information, and there's no way we can get it all done in the next couple of months. But so we'll push it off 5 or 6 months, and hopefully we can get a spring referendum on that. But I think, I don't want people to think that we're just dragging our feet to do anything. We're going to work hard on this to make sure we have the right plans in place, and we're going to make sure that that we can properly give all the information to everybody in this town, so they know what they're going to be facing come the time when their taxes are going to go up. So.
Thanks, Mr. Walsh. Other questions? Mr. Veliver.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a couple quick questions, and these are maybe just timelining questions, or maybe some things for me. Question: you mentioned demolition costs. If we, Are those, I think you may have answered this at the Dodd presentation, but I can't remember. Are the demolition costs included in the numbers that we already have? So so for example, if we built a new Norton
Mhm.
on the property, or if we have to build a new Chapman, regardless of what we have to do, the costs for those schools is already contemplating the demolition costs for those buildings, correct?
Yes, correct. For the Norton, or I'll say the South Elementary School program, if it's built at Norton,
Yep.
there is demolition costs included in it. The low range being 1.2 million up to almost 1.5 million, depending on the cost per square foot. That is included because we would definitely need that area for parking, playgrounds, whatever it may be. In the northern site, we have not included demolition of the Chapman. If it's built up north, you have that option. You don't necessarily have to demolish, say if it was at the Jarvis site, you don't necessarily have to demolish Chapman right away. You can redistrict and they can go there and the town can determine what you want to do with that. So we did not include demolition in the northern project.
Okay. Another question is and this goes to maybe, the capacity charts that we've looked at. And I assume that the answer to this question is going to be yes, but for my own education, I thought I would ask. So building these two new schools would alleviate the capacity concerns also at Highland and Doolittle, correct?
That is correct.
Going forward, based on some of these numbers, some of the chart keeps going up and we don't know what's going to happen. We only go out so far. But we're contemplating that if building these new schools, we're going to meet that capacity, not only to eliminate these charts, but going forward as well. So
correct. The state of Connecticut, so by statute, the state of Connecticut only allows us to project. They'll only accept projections up to 8 years after the grant commitment. So a grant application, so we submitted in 22, we would start the October 1 of 22 and the following 7 years after that. That's why it's really important between now and when we submit, to update those and for SLR to continue to be engaged with the Board of Ed to see what the trends are happening. Because obviously with COVID, especially now, some parents chose to keep their children home. So it kind of threw them off just a little bit. They tried to account for those with their experience. I mean, they've done these for years throughout the state of Connecticut. But certainly this October, the plan is to have them, okay, let's check what the enrollments are, especially at the kindergarten level, where you have births coming in and people, folks moving in, hopefully keeping abreast and see how's that trend against the original. Is it staying consistent or is it off? If it is, why is that? And analyzing that. But yeah, I think we went out 10 years here. It's always the unknown of, once you get beyond that accuracy kind of starts to widen a bit, I believe.
And then also, just question, obviously, if we build the two new schools, those two schools will have air conditioning.
Absolutely.
Highland is the only other elementary school currently that has air conditioning.
Mm-hmm.
So that would leave Doolittle and Dodd as being unair conditioned. In this plan, phase one, phase two, where does the contemplation of air conditioning come in, especially maybe at Dodd? If the school is not the middle school is not rebuilt, where in the plan, and maybe in the SMC considerations, was air conditioning Dodd ever in that consideration?
So I think it really depends on when the phase-in is, because we can lay out, phase one, I think there's a pretty clear picture. Humiston's got to get thrown in there somewhere. And at that point, as you said, the capacity gets resolved. So then I think it becomes a priority issue of, do we renovate in the renovation of Dodd, which is in the total numbers here? In a renovation, it's like new. That term is renovate like new. That would be fully air conditioned, energy efficient, meeting all the standards. So I think there in Doolittle, it's a matter of it's that financial aspect of how soon after you finish with phase one do you go, right after with a referendum as those are completing. Obviously, 3 years down the road, you probably have to look at, but they've been incorporated in the numbers. It's just a matter of when.
Gotcha. And is Doolittle contemplated as staying as it is? Maybe renovated, but keeping the physical structure as it is.
Yeah, renovation and, you reprogram some areas. It's amazing what they can do with renovation projects. The design teams are extremely talented. So I think you mentioned North Haven. We worked on that project and the core area got renovated, and you probably wouldn't know it walking, if you're trained professionally, you might, but it looks like brand new, there. So yeah, you basically use the bones of it and redo all the finishes, the electrical, the mechanical, the plumbings. So it's like new condition for another 20 years.
So, okay, so Doolittle and Dodd would be sort of phase 2 potentially. Reason I asked is just because obviously over the last week or two, especially as we got closer to the end of the year with the heat that we had, basically everyone, all the schools other than Highland, because it's the only air conditioned school, basically went to a half day, that they had, or remote because of the heat. So I was just curious if that, that's going to continue to be a problem for all these schools if they're not air conditioned. So.
Yeah, certainly. Like you say, you get done with the first phase, and then it's kind of okay. Kind of take a breath and go, okay, where are you at? That's what I'd be recommending is, okay, where are we at? Where's your debt service? What else is going in town? If you can afford to move forward with a second one, continue. Hopefully, the process is a successful one, and you're under budget and on time, and you can hopefully do that.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes, Mr. Jenks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to kind of follow up on something Dave was talking about as far as the kind of at the end of the decade and the capacity utilization. This is something that we had kind of talked about we did talk about obviously as part of the SMC process. And I promise I'm not going to spend all my time throughout this process speaking poorly of the recommended proposal. But, I fully respect all the work that went into the two proposals. So what I just want to say as far as the utilization goes is that we do have a situation where with the two elementary schools, that scenario where at the end of the decade, 29, 30, we're at about 95, 96% utilization. So we're at a point there where we have these two kind of large elementary schools in Norton and whatever, would be in the north end. And they are at the sort of top end of what the state kind of recommends. We would have a Highland Elementary School that because of the pre-K and the kindergarten programs moving into Highland, or pre-K anyway, it would be well above 800, which is above the recommended elementary school size for the state. So we would have that plus an out of favor middle school model of 7 to 8. And then we would also have a high school that we hadn't done anything with yet, of course, because we hadn't gotten there yet. But that's, to me, it's a profile that I'm very concerned about. I'm honestly very concerned about, and I hope that it's something that we kind of consider. If we get to the end of the decade where we have some pretty large elementary schools and we're growing perhaps more than we're even projecting here, which are high estimates, which is quite possible to happen because when we're building new schools, we're going to attract more people. If we get to the end of the decade and our elementary schools are already very large and we've sort of kind of maxed out that space, then we're like I said, we have kind of an out of favor middle school and a high school we haven't done anything to yet, and we sort of still have the elementary school problem. So it is a potential weakness of this recommended scenario that I just hope that we're kind of keeping in mind, or will keep in mind.
Thank you, Mr. Jenks. Other questions? A couple of things. Let's talk a little bit about right-sizing the buildings from a reimbursement perspective, because obviously that's really important. We want to maximize our reimbursement, whatever plan we move forward. So can you just chat a little bit about, how we make sure we've done that well when we get to the design phase, that we've set the square footage exactly where it needs to be, that's accepted by the state of Connecticut, that we're not going to be at a 95% of that square footage calculation versus 100%. And, how do we walk that path?
Sure. Yeah. So it's an iterative path. It's one that requires a partnership with the state, and that's why we reached out to them early already. A lot of things go into that. Obviously, the enrollment projections and looking holistically at let's just say the elementary schools at this point. It's looking at those. It's also looking at the specific educational programs that Cheshire provides in those schools. And the ed specs, that would be one of the steps leading up to the grant application, and those would get drafted early. But it's a conversation with, it's creating the educational specifications, which if you haven't seen those before, basically it's the program for the building. It lays out all the spaces, all the general classrooms, music, art, gym, cafeteria, all those spaces, and what the Board of Ed thinks they're going to need for the program. And what we do is we will go up to the state and we'll have that complete, and we'll talk with them. We'll have a meeting and going, here's what they are. And the state's going to test that. And what we do is we compare that ed spec / program, and we calculate a square footage off of that. And then we compare it against the space standard and go, okay, where are we falling? And it's a dynamic process. And again, it's a back and forth with the experts at the state. If we were to start at that calculation, that standard, and for those that are listening, the space standard ratio is the space standard calculation, which is an average, per student multiplied by that 8-year high enrollment, and it gives us a square foot. We take that number, we divide that by the number that we want to build. So if it's 90,000 is a space standard and 100,000 what we want to build, that's a 90% space standard ratio, just as a quick example. Anything on a new building starting less than 94, 95 is probably going to be a stress with the state. They're going to want to understand why and justify, and they're going to look at space by space. They're going to, okay, what's your square footage of your kindergarten classrooms? Well, those are typically 1,000, 1,100 square feet. Has a bathroom inside of it, so they don't have to go out. Standard classrooms, 900 square feet. They're going to look at a gym. Those are typically anywhere from 4,500 to 6,000 square feet for elementary schools. They're going to look at your special education spaces and those needs. OT/PT is typically another space hungry program. So they're going to be looking at this specific program and making sure there's nothing to agree. Is making sure, like, for example, the principal's office isn't, 250 square feet when it could be 190 square feet. That's just one example. Or a gym's not 7,500 square feet because of a community use. They'll help you build educational. They're not going to build community spaces. That's another tack. So it's really a back and forth, Rob, that, once we get the ed spec complete and the programs, 90% dialed in before the Board of Ed approves it, we always recommend that we go back to the state, review with them, get their informal endorsement. They'll never sign on, in writing, but to see where that lies. And they do that well before a grant, before the grant application and the priority list. They're going to, we always vet that out before we submit. So we don't want to waste time submitting an application that they're not going to be on board with and partner with, but they're also going to be looking at what's going on with the other schools as well. Again, they're looking at it holistically. So it's an iterative process with them.
Thank you. So it's collaborative along the way. There's no surprises at the end where you submit your design and they say, whoops, we're only going to reimburse you 85% because you've overbuilt this.
Yeah.
This is a process that's going to be walking the path with them all the way through.
Yeah, well, that's where they've improved their program, and that they want to see what you're going to build before they put you on the priority list. So once you get the grant application, which is in June, in the months of October, they started looking at all these and vetting these and going, okay, who are we going to put on that priority list? What's the list we're going to send to the governor to recommend? If you're not right sized, you're not getting it. It's basically, I call it invitation to the party or invitation to the dance. If you're not in that process, they're not going to put you on. They're going to say, go do your homework. That's what we want to do now. And kind of go into the timeline that Mr. Walsh mentioned is the state wants you to do your homework. They love a plan. And they appreciate it when districts do their homework. It's well thought out. I mean, Ms. Nichols was there. They want that. They don't want you to rush into they see so many districts submit grant applications that their districts are afraid they're going to run out of money. Like the state's going to stop supporting. And he said, he goes, we're not going anywhere. We're going to continue to support the need, but you have to do your homework. We want to be partners. We're not going to put good money after bad. We're going to invest it wisely. They want to be partners, but they've seen this a lot. They know what they're doing. They've seen a lot of districts, they've seen a lot of projects, and they know what it should look like, but they look at each district uniquely. I can say that they don't put one size fits all. Okay, what's good for North Haven is good for Cheshire. No, they're going to look at Cheshire specifically and ask the superintendent, what do you need and what do you need to be supported with?
So the sizing of the new buildings is going to be based on enrollment projections, obviously.
That's where we start, yes.
Right. And to Mr. Jinks's point, he raises a point that could be a very valid point, that, in these enrollment projections at the end of the cycle, which is 29-30, we're at the high end of what their sized buildings want to be. How does that play into this? I mean, the last thing we would want to do is get into a scenario where we've just modernized our buildings and 8-10 years later, we're maxed out there. So how would that be possible? I mean, clearly, if you have a huge blip that enrollment didn't take into account for, that could happen.
Sure.
But, how do we alleviate the issue that Mr. Jinks just raised?
The one strategy we incorporated after phase 1 in South Windsor, and I apologize to keep referencing that, but they had a big influx in their enrollment. The first school came in, it was planned for 576 students. We opened with 630. We had to take a computer lab and turn it into a classroom. Fortunately, we had enough desks. We kind of scrambled it together and put that in place in time. But going forth on the second 2 schools, keywords flexibility in designing the building and the site so that we can expand if we need to add on 2-4 classrooms to say at the end of the wing, so that it looks like it was part of the original design and not a scab on to a building for the sake of accommodating those. That came to fruition. We did add alternates for 2 additional classrooms at Eli Terry and 3 at Philip R. Smith as alternates. Fortunately, the bids came in, under budget and under our estimates, and we were able to award those with those contracts at a very competitive price. Midstream in construction, they kept updating the enrollments and keeping abreast of those, and the superintendent was concerned that at the Eli Terry that they weren't going to have enough. She looked at the savings and said, hey, can we build 2 more? How would we do it? Middle design gave the ad service to the architect. They figured out a place to put it so that it wasn't obvious, if you will. We were able to afford it in the budget through proactive budget management and good bids. And we were able to finish the line with those 2 at the same time as the rest of the school and leave it. So I think the key thing is that flexibility in these newer projects for sure, certainly, but probably identifying at the existing schools if need be, where can, if we had to expand sooner than later, could we do something there?
Well, I guess I understand it. Maybe I wasn't exactly clear what I was kind of getting at. I guess what I'm asking is, in the proposed plan that's being recommended, are you comfortable that we've got enough square footage to meet the enrollment projections that are here? Because what Mr. Jinks is suggesting is, and he may be absolutely right, I haven't looked at it, is that in the last year or so of the projection, we could be at the high end of the building size that the state wants. Are we at capacity at that point? And if we have some really abnormal numbers, we're going to be stuck? I mean, I know you can look at any project that way, but, is there anything in the way we've designed this recommended proposal against the enrollment numbers that concerns you? I guess that's my question.
Not
If
at
there
this point.
was, you wouldn't be proposing it, correct?
Correct. I mean, we get the numbers from SLR. They're the experts there. We take their information, and all of our, at least the proposal and the budgets were based upon that. So the minimum number, your lower end, is at space standard. The upper end of the high end of the high, we added 10% over the space standard to account for the programming that I was discussing earlier, to account for that. As far as the outer years, the state's going to tell you, we only go out 8 years, because if so, we would overbuild in every district. And that's going to be their argument, is we only go out to 8 years statutorily. We understand the concern. However, statutorily, they have to stick with that space standard calculation. They have some flexibility, but it's got to be within a tolerance. So,
And in this,
comfortable
I'm
with it.
sorry to belabor this point, but
That's fine.
I think Mr. Jinks raises a very good point that's worthy of some conversation. Would it be appropriate in any of these instances to make sure that you've got some expansion space that you can design that kind of blends well to the building that, if we end up with 100 more kids in this school, whatever the number is, that somehow we can marry a new addition to what we built, 5, 6, 8 years ago, that looks great. It's easily done. It's not a huge impact to the existing facility. How would we look at that?
Oh, you'd incorporate when we bring the architect on board, we incorporate it into their scope of services that, yes, here's your base, here's your fundamental, the building. However, when you're designing and massing the site and designing the building, we want you to accommodate for 6 more classrooms or 4 more classrooms, whatever it might be, into the plan. And they would identify, you see a dotted line, and they would identify where it's going to be. They would design the mechanicals, the electrical with stub out, so that when you do that in the future, you're not redoing. All you're doing is extending ductwork. You're extending the domestic water line, the heating lines, all your IT and infrastructure. You would design that to accommodate, and that's been done many times. They just did it we're in New Fairfield, where our colleague was the architect on the project, and he's working with us. He designed their intermediate school, I think they're grade 5, 6 school, to accommodate a future expansion. We're stubbing into those now, years later.
And assuming the enrollment provides that we would need it, that is also a reimbursable addition, correct?
Yeah, as long as you substantiate it with the state and keep communications, you say, okay, hey, here's the enrollments, these are facts, and here's our numbers, and it's continuing to grow. That would be another conversation with the state. They did support our expansion at South Windsor midstream. It's a matter of just substantiating it with the data and the numbers.
So my last question relates to kind of test fits of the site. Now, I know we talked about this, the proposal is 2 new elementary schools. We have an idea of potential sites, but nothing was specifically identified, whether you rebuild on Chapman, whether you look at the Jarvis Street property, or excuse me, the Marion Road property that the town owns up there, which is a bit larger. I would think that may be a better location. Norton, obviously, we don't own anything down there that I'm aware of, but there seems to be enough acreage there to potentially work. So I guess it would be important for us to be looking at the appropriate time for some test fitting relative to what we're planning fits on which sites and how well. And while we're doing that, potentially look at, the expansion requirements. If we do miss the enrollment numbers and we have a big influx of people, are we able to expand on those locations? So, when we get into a test fit, just a note, I would be interested to hear, are we maxed out at the existing building that we're going to be building? Or can we accommodate a small expansion in the event that we run into a scenario that Mr. Jinks is talking about?
Absolutely. And we are procuring, I have 2 proposals received today for that test fit, and getting the 3rd one, probably, I might have it already, from 3 reputable firms that we've worked with to do those. And we can certainly make sure that they look at that. I mean, what's a reasonable, like you say, 100 students, that's roughly 4, maybe 5 classrooms at 1,000 square feet plus corridors. You're probably looking at probably 7,000 additional square feet for 100 students. And I'm kind of roughing a ballpark in here, but we can certainly have them do that for sure.
Okay,
It's not a problem.
thank you. Other questions, comments? Yeah, Mr. Barway, sure.
Follow up to exactly your point. You're doing the fit for Norton. I heard you make comment. Are you doing the fit for Chapman as well?
Not at this time, because there was a test fit done, I believe it was 2017. And I believe Taisu Kim Partners was the architectural firm that did it for a new middle school. We'll have to confirm the square footage, but looking at that site and the size of it, we can certainly do one. I don't think it'd be a bad idea to, but at this time, we're not asking for that proposal. We are asking them to give us a unit price for additional test fits in their proposal. So if you select it, hey, let's test fit that, we already have a price in place.
Okay, because I know with the SMC and their discussions, it was important whether the school could stay there, whether it could be retrofitted. I think it's pretty much decided it can't be retrofitted, but whether it could stay there or whether it goes, as we've talked about, the Jarvis Marion piece or other pieces.
Yeah, and we could, and as you requested before, we could certainly test it if the if the council wanted to say look at a renovation. I think part of the conversation with that is if you have to do abatement in phasing, children being in the school. I think the children are more resilient. It's more the parents' concern from a safety, and they're very, very safe. We build walls. They don't interact with each other, but it's a perception and it's a real concern for us. I think that was part of it as well.
Yeah, but I personally, one council member, I agree with the SMC's recommendation that that school not be renovated because I just don't think it's going to make economic sense and it's too far gone. It was the one that we didn't do last time because it didn't really need to be done. You know, a
And
generation
you probably
ago.
program the site better with a new one as well.
Exactly.
But you're correct. There was a test fit done for the middle school that was proposed last time on that Marion Road site, and it fit. So I assume it would fit for an elementary school. Obviously, at the appropriate time, I think we would want to do a test fit just to make sure it lays out the way we would want, if in fact that's the chosen location. Now, if we get to the point where people want to look at, I don't think it, I would necessarily, my gut reaction is to build another new middle school on the existing Chapman site. I think in my mind, that could be a tight site to do that on, but I'm obviously all ears to that if we thought it was reasonable to look at it. If that was the case, you'd need to do a test fit.
Absolutely. It's a small site, I think, with 9 acres.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's extremely, if you were rebuilding Chapman as it is for the same square footage, it would be tight at that, in my opinion. If you're looking at the numbers we're looking at, 100,000 square foot building, no, I don't have to really think about that too much in that regard.
And
it's
again,
only
we're
10
not
acres.
committed to the Marion Road site, but if in fact that was a location for the new Chapman building,
Yeah.
I thought I read somewhere that actually helped with redistricting a bit locationally. Is that accurate?
Yeah, if I understand the question correctly, because you have Chapman and Highland are so close to each other. And Highland District actually goes north of the Chapman up in that northwest district. By having that up there, it more gives you, I think, better distribution. And the maps are, their maps are in the report, but it seems to be better distributed geographically speaking.
Right. Yeah, Mr. Veliver, thank you.
Thank you. Question, and David, I think my question, maybe I'm following up on what you asked, and it was I thought we were talking about the idea of having a test fit for a new Chapman on the balance of Chapman property, and I wasn't sure if that was sort of what your question was. Okay, that's what I thought you were saying. So sort of like what you're looking at for Norton, but for Chapman, could you fit a new Chapman on the Chapman property as opposed to another location? And I guess that was the question.
So early discussions were if we're replacing Chapman in kind with a smaller enrollment, and I want to say 350, but I have to go back and look at the number. But a smaller enrollment, we're talking 650 kids, basically 95,000, 100,000 square feet. Based on my experience and looking at other, I just don't think it could fit. We're doing 100,000 square feet in South Windsor on 24 acres, and it's we're pushing. We got a couple fields that we're going to have, but outside of that, it's still it would probably be close to 20 acres for 100,000 plus turnaround. It just, you're not going to fit it there.
Okay, that's I just wanted to clarify
Yeah.
that. I just wanted to make
I'm
sure
pretty
I
confident
understood.
with
Okay, that's fine. I just wanted to clarify that one because that's what I heard the question was. But also, question and if it goes back to something you were talking about before about the building a school for public, for town uses. And like, for example, whether you wanted to build a bigger gymnasium for other purposes. I guess the question is, do other schools do that? I mean, because I'm looking, one of the things that the town has, and we've been working on this, talking about our recreational uses throughout towns and how we can utilize some of those things, whether, for example, it's basketball programs or other things. And obviously, I was just thinking, is that something, I understand it's not potentially reimbursable at the full amount if you want to go bigger, but I was just curious whether that's something other towns have done or whether it's something maybe we want to think about doing as we look at some of our other programming, just whether we have enough programming space to do some of those things, like having, if we want to have more basketball space, well, it makes sense that you're already building a brand new gymnasium. If you put new basketball courts in there, that becomes a new rental location or place that people can play. And I just want, obviously, then the question is, ultimately, is the standard size of 4,500 to 6,000, I think is what you said, 45 is, that's something, is that big enough to do something with, or is it, if we want to go If not, if we would say, well, now we want 2 basketball courts in there or something big enough to hold something like that, something we'd have to factor into, and obviously something we'd have to consider whether we want to build something bigger, but that's obviously going to come out of our pocket, not something that's reimbursable, correct?
Yeah, well, yes and no. So 6,000 square feet, the South Windsor ones, the early ones we did were 4,500 square feet. Adequate for elementary students in their program and in some of the youth leagues.
Yep.
I think they get a little bit small for, if you do like some, parks and rec, the adult, the 15, 18 high school age. The last one we are doing 6,000 square feet. We did a couple elementary schools in Stonington with 6,000, and they can provide basically, a full width court where you can play. It's not as long, but it's still a full size court where you can use it for more broad use, if you will, for that. But if you want, okay, we don't want to do a whole second court. The last discussion, and I'm going off of recollection here with the state, is it's still going to be a tough one to get them to even agree to put you on the list, because what happens is the state of Connecticut years ago, the towns would say, we're going to build X. They'd get on the priority list. They'd put in notwithstanding legislation through their legislators.
Yep.
And get that additional square footage to be reimbursed. And once you're on the priority list, that office has no more, they don't have any more control over what the legislators do. Right. And so that's why they limit it right up front. So that's why that discussion of, hey, we're willing to pay for it, that's a delicate discussion.
Well, thank you. And I also appreciate your thoughts on, I don't really know the size of what a full-size basketball court would actually take up as far as how many square feet you need. So even at 6,000 square feet, you're not really talking about necessarily a full adult size basketball.
Yeah, it's not a high school size. High schools are typically around 8,000 or 9,000 these days, but they only have one side has bleachers. They don't put bleachers on both sides anymore. It seems like they used to, and it'd be maybe 10 or 12,000 square feet.
But it could still be used for youth sports.
Absolutely, yeah. With the 6,000 square foot ones, we have full-size court, as a divider, and we have 5 or 6 rows of bleachers. It can accommodate, I think, about 180 spectators. So it's pretty decent for, recreational programs.
Okay. I'm just trying to think about how we can
Certainly.
put that into our repertoire of available spaces from recreational usage.
Yeah.
So thank you.
And it balances out well with the rest of the program, because when you're dealing with so many square feet, you're challenged between the different programs. Okay, where are we going to put these square feet? And everybody wants more square feet, but there's only so much, right? So it's a matter of how do you balance in the program.
Thank you, Mr. Veliver. Mr. Jenks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I just wanted to go back to the Chapman discussion real quick. I might be able to clarify it a little bit if we need to, but the middle school, when we were looking at the middle school scenario, we were talking about the possibility of K-5 Chapman being on the same spot, which is why there's a discussion of a test fit on the Chapman location in the middle school scenario. I also say that the Chapman community, as many of you probably know, is that school is near and dear to their heart. It's a relatively small school. It's a small community. They love that size. Obviously, even if it's a larger K-5, it's going to be, even if it's K-5, it's going to be larger because we have an increase in population. A much larger K-6 is not, as I said before, is not necessarily what people are looking for there. But and I had comments from the public too, as far as the location. No one was concerned about it being close to the prison. Some people actually said they felt like it was safer being near the prison. They liked the location kind of close to the ambulance bay and the fire department and the police department. It's kind of close to all those things. Unfortunately, we have, thinking about those things in this day and age. But, so there's lots of interest in maintaining a school at that site if it can be the right size. So just wanted to kind of clarify that a little bit.
Thank you, Mr. Jenks. Ms. Nichols.
Thank you, Rob. To the question of the gymnasiums and the auditoriums, we didn't bring that up, but in schools, am I recalling that there are some schools that wanted spaces to be able to accommodate the entire school at an assembly or an event, and were not able to have, the state did not approve the space large enough in an auditorium or a gym situation that accommodated the entire school for one event, and that they'd had to split things sometimes into 2. Is that correct? Or am I remembering wrong?
No, so that is correct. Currently the state's policy for auditoriums, and primarily, they don't even support them in middle schools anymore. It's mostly in new high schools. They'll reimburse for half of the projected enrollment. So, if it's 1,000, student, they'll support a 500, unless you're doing a renovation. Some schools already have these larger, auditoriums. Elementary school levels, they won't support an auditorium in their programming. They typically use the gym, and there's a platform and it doubled up a stage and maybe a general music classroom. They pair of doors that would shut and use that for your assembly spaces in the gym. But
So
yes,
how
state doesn't
many,
support it.
do any school systems enlarge the spaces large enough to accommodate those students so they have one central thing and then just accept the difference in cost that they have to pay without being reimbursed?
It kind of goes back to the gym costs.
Yeah.
It's a tough discussion because if it fits within the program, and you can say, hey, we want to build a full size gym, and it fits within the program, and the Board of Education says, yeah, we're willing to take that square footage, a little bit of the corridors, a little bit of each classroom, and add to that, and it stays within an acceptable space standard calculation for the state, they'll say go ahead. But if it's okay, if the discussion is we're willing to take that on our backs and take the hit in the reimbursement rate, that hasn't been, from what I've seen, accepted too many times with the state because of what I said with notwithstanding legislation. After the fact, they want to know what when you submit the grant application for X amount of square feet, that's what's going to be built.
Okay, and to go to Ms. Pavano's statement, go back to that about costs. We're talking about costs. Do you foresee increased costs from what you've projected to us now based on what we're seeing immediately as a result of the COVID thing? Do you think going forward in 5 years, those costs are going to escalate at the same rate? I mean, are we looking at the true numbers? And that was her concern before, I think.
And a great point where I think we're all seeing those increases in material costs. We are seeing them starting to hit some projects. We have had some projects recently in the last month, and John has one going out. It's out to bid right now for renovation to a high school. So we're watching it very closely. We had a new elementary school in Mansfield come in, a $40 million budget. It's the first net zero school in Connecticut. Came in at roughly $36 million, just like a month ago. So you see that and you go, okay, materials are going up, but are they adjusting for labor? I think there's a lot of factors are going into it. I think that's going to catch up for a period of time. Question is, how long is that going to last? I think what's going to be really important is when we finalize these budgets for the referendum, I'm going to be talking to our professional estimators, our constituents, the contractors that we work with, architects, and really going, okay, what's really going on here? And also talking to the state, because they're going to see a lot of projects come in and go, where are they coming at compared to the budget? And where should this be? Because they have a cap of $365 per square foot for the building alone right now. And that's what we use for a max on your high is $365 per square foot for just the building. We're going to have that conversation with them and go, what are you seeing coming in across the state? We have our projects, but obviously there's a lot more out there that we have to watch. So in 5 years, I wish I could honestly tell you, but I can't. I don't have that thing we're all been looking for a long time.
Don't expect you to have that answer.
But we're going to monitor it, though.
We're paying attention. Right?
Yes, absolutely. That's a very, very hot topic with us. And I just got an email yesterday for a police station. I think North Branford put out their police station and it came out real high, a lot higher than they expected to. But we were involved with the design process. I don't know if they, went through the estimating process and to keep it within budget.
Thank you.
Anybody else? 2 quick questions and then I'm done. Appreciate you staying with us because as people ask different questions and we hear comments, it kind of provokes some additional thoughts. And so while we had some time, I'm glad we were able to get through some stuff. But I'm assuming your budget numbers don't include any outside athletic fields or things of that nature. Is that correct or is that not correct?
That is correct. It'll include site development for multipurpose fields that support the educational need and the ed spec program, but not necessarily a synthetic turf field, soccer, football field, if you will. Those have been incorporated in projects. They are ineligible. Artificial turf fields are ineligible with the state, but we've seen them in projects though.
That was my next question. Is there any support from the state for that stuff? Because obviously we've got a project that down at Bartland Park that includes a synthetic turf field, and maybe there's a way to kind of roll that into a school project and kind of retool Bartlam to not include the field there if there was some reimbursement, but there's no reimbursement.
As
at
of
all.
right now, they don't support it. Do you guys ask that on Wyndham?
Yes.
By chance? Okay. So.
I mean, you know, maybe things will change. Given COVID, I think everyone's recognized the importance of outdoor space and being able to get outside. So maybe you can make a pitch to have some of that included in reimbursement. But anyway, I kind of assumed that was the answer, but I figured I'd ask anyway. Yes, Mr. Kimball.
Only just along those same lines, is that also true for lights if we were to light a field at a school? Are
I
those
think
also
if
ineligible?
it's lighting that field, yeah.
It would be
Yeah,
ineligible.
Anything associated with that, I think, well, North Haven Middle School, if you went and saw that, they built 2 synthetic fields in the back that, I mean, they came out beautiful. Those are basically ineligible, pretty much.
Okay. Yeah, Mr. Vellner.
Just a quick question, follow up on what you're, but natural fields are contemplated, right? So, leveling and creating a soccer field, a natural grass field or a softball field or something like that, that is a good, but it's only when you get into the more premium level of a turf field that you're talking about, right?
Yeah, pretty much you're talking the synthetics, and all the elementary schools have we call them multi-purpose fields. It supports the health and education,
Just a
classes,
big open
physical
field.
education classes. Hey, if you happen to use it for, use soccer, well, so be it. You can line it whatever way you like, so. Yeah.
Thank you.
Sorry, if I could just add to that question one more time then. So when I was referring to the lights, I was referring more to a natural grass. That's something we've also been looking at as an option to extend the day that we can have some of our athletic opportunities. So maybe that's something we can look into.
That'd be an interesting. I think we'd have to have a conversation with them because it depends how we phrase it and
Right,
how we,
right.
because school's not in usually at night on one
Right,
of those, so that could be interesting.
Safety.
There you go. Overflow parking for the for the events, yeah. Because you won't have enough parking no matter what. It doesn't. No school does.
Okay, anything else? Mr. Walsh?
Yeah, just one last thing. I just want to let the public know that, in the meantime, the schools will be well maintained and safe and secure for the kids until we find something. So don't think that we're going to hold back on funding anything unless it's a major project to make sure that the students still have a safe and secure place to attend school. So, we're not just saying, okay, we're not going to spend any more money on the schools because we're going to build something. But I just want to make sure the public understood that.
Thank you, Mr. Walsh. Anybody else? One last? No? Okay, well, thank you all for being here tonight. I think it was certainly a fruitful kickoff of the next phase of SMC relative to the town council. As I said in the beginning, I personally think we should try to meet every 2 weeks if we can. Obviously, if we can't, we'll make some modifications, but I think it's important that we keep this train going down the tracks and that we not let too much time pass. It is important. We're all engaged in this, and I think it's appropriate. So with that, I guess we can work offline, Sean, with you guys about putting together a schedule, and we'll get that out to the group and see what kind of dates work best for us based on what our schedule looks like with other town council meetings, and we'll get stuff put on the agenda and we'll keep moving forward, and we'll certainly do our best to get questions or comments or things in writing ahead of time. Jim, I know you've got a lot on your plate, and I apologize for probably what we're going to do to you. But we'll apologize in advance. As we've said to you many times, you have a phenomenal department. I know you can handle it. You and Gina do a great job, and your entire staff. So we're sorry that we're going to have to put more work on your table, but it is critically important to this community that we get it right, as Mr. Walsh says, and I know you're all in with both feet. So appreciate in advance for your efforts that are going to be coming forward. So with that, I guess if there's nothing else, I'll call for a motion to adjourn. Thank you, Ms. Slocum. Thank you, Mr. Jenks. All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously of those that are here. Thank you all. Good night.
Good night. Next Tuesday, see you all for the capital budget.